What is up, everyone? It's RCA Apologist here with another video. Not as bright as before. Anyways, regarding the matter here, of course, this is going to be a video covering the topic of free will, but in a different way to do so. Put that down there a bit. Put the coffee mug with not coffee mug, the tea mug, shall we say. Anyways, regarding the matter of this topic, I want to go over something that I've found in the reading, and I figured it'd be interesting to put forth the analogy that was proposed. As some of you may know, I had recently gotten a hold of this booklet here. It's a small one. It's about, in terms of actual content of the book, about 52 pages long. So, and it's $5.95. You can order it from the Trinity Foundation, which I believe is a place that basically has a lot of the publicated works of Gordon Clark. Now, while I may not agree with Clark on a lot of things, there are some things I could find in the book that definitely could conform to an interesting thought. The main disagreements with Clark have been the issues regarding the manners of one person tried to say, I haven't found any of that yet in his deal, though I believe I actually just did find it here, so that kind of confirms. So one person who had heard the view is that essentially for his view of the problem of evil, his little defense for the issue is that God is essentially ex lex, which is that God is outside the law, that the law may stem from God, but there is the sense that God is now bound by the law. I would have a disagreement with this particular notion in light of the fact that God is the one who created and established the law, and such in this issue with I would go with on John Frame on, essentially that God then has the law being a reflection of his character and morality, essentially. So I would have to disagree with Clark on that matter. But however, this video and the next one that I plan on doing are going to cover the notions of the problems that can stem within this debate for those who are in the essence of the non-Calvinistic aspect of it. Now, while I agree that there might be some difficulties that must be answered by the Calvinist, because you have to. With any type of thing where there's an objection made, you're going to need to address the issue. But that being said, and again, regardless of if there's anyone watching at the moment, or if there are people who will watch it later on, we're going to go over the elements of this particular work. And I see we have at least 3 people joining so far, so that should be good for the live part of this. Anyways, regarding the issue here, the God and evil, the problem solved by Gordon Clark, there are 2 sections I want to go over. The first one for today deals with the section or the chapter that is referred to as free will, which the section itself begins in page 12 of this booklet. And by the time we get to page 16, I'm minding this down in case anyone wants to look for it, unless anyone wants to try to make a quote out of this. But it's on page 16 of this booklet that we read the following, quote, "Is the theory of free will, even if true, a satisfactory explanation of evil in a world created by God? Reasons, compelling reasons, will now be given for a negative answer, even if men were as able to choose good and evil, even if a sinner could choose Christ as easily as he could reject him, it would be totally irrelevant to the fundamental problem. Free will was put forward to relieve God of responsibility for sin, but this does not do so." So, regarding the manner here of what is stated here, Clark has put forward that there is the issue of granting free will for the sake of debate, for the sake of the notion of things. So Clark has this issue where he's going to grant it, but however he's going to give a negative answer based upon the premises of the fundamental. Sorry about that. Got a deal there. Also, like he says original wind production, but I think I know who that might be. Give Clark credit for the bravado problem solved. Yeah, because if anyone is familiar with Clark, he was definitely an interesting case, and from what I had heard in a couple of documentaries that covered his rise into the career of apologetics, and the fact of his philosophical background, Clark would have essentially, had it not been for the Van Til and Clark controversy, Clark would have made it within the masses of the Christian apologetic world, and he would essentially been the William Lane Craig of his day based on what was kind of heard, because he was about to become a big name in the world of philosophy, especially within Christian philosophy, and he was at Westminster Seminary, where definitely this was a big thing happening regarding the educational rise and increase within Christianity. But while he was there, he ended up getting involved in that controversy, and it kind of took a split, and he kind of went to a different direction at that point. But yeah, he's a very philosophically trained individual and does like to utilize a lot of philosophy and logic in his line of thought with the notion of the Bible. But as he points here, he's willing to grant the issue of free will for the sake of argument. And we get into one of the problems that is then raised, because as he mentions, that regardless of if men could choose good and evil just as equally as they could reject Christ, he says it is, quote, totally irrelevant to the fundamental problem. And the issue of the problem is that supposedly free will being utilized to say, God cannot be responsible for sin. We usually hear that argument from some of the non-Calvinists, is that Calvinism makes God responsible for sin and the author or the causation of sin. But in the case of what Clark notes in page 16, in the next paragraph, he says, quote, suppose there was a lifeguard stationed on a dangerous beach. In the breakers, a boy is being sucked out to sea by the strong undertow. He cannot swim. He will drown without powerful aid. It will have to be powerful, for as drowning sinners do, he will struggle against his rescuer. But the lifeguard simply sits on his high chair and watches him drown. Perhaps he may, about a few words of advice, and tell him to exercise his free will, i.e., telling them to swim and get out of the situation. After all, it was of his own free will that the boy went into the surf. The guard did not push him in, nor interfere with him in any way. The guard merely permitted him to go in and permitted him to drown. And of course, this doesn't just apply to the Arminian, but to other free will theists out there. But he poses the question, would an Arminian now conclude that the lifeguard thus escapes culpability? This illustration, with its finite limitations, is damaging enough as it is. It shows that permission of evil, as contrasted with positive causality, does not relieve a lifeguard from responsibility. Similarly, if God merely permits men to be engulfed in sin of their own free wills, the original objections of Voltaire and Professor Patterson are not thereby met. This is what the Arminian fails to notice, and yet the illustration does not do full justice to the actual situation. For unlike the boy, who exists in relative independence of the lifeguard, in actuality, God made the boy and the ocean too. Now, if the guard, who is not a creator at all, is responsible for permitting the boy to drown, even if the boy is supposed to have entered the surf of his own free will, does not God, who has made them, appear in a worse light? Surely an omnipotent God could have either made the boy a better swimmer or made the ocean less rough, or at least saved him from the drowning. Now, this analogy that has been presented by Clark, I think, is a very interesting one, and one that needs to be considered by those who are objecting to the theology and the doctrines of Calvinism, specifically those who make the objection that God is responsible for sin and thus is the author of sin and thus is to be held accountable when he predestines these specific acts. The issue then is raised as a counter to the issue of the lifeguard, who simply does not, who did not create the surf, and that did not create the water, did not create the ocean, did not create the components that can cause these specific instances of someone drowning. The issue then becomes, okay, then in that case, is the guard likewise responsible simply because as the lifeguard he does not push the boy in, he does not directly get involved in the matter. He just simply stands by and tells the person to utilize their free will without any form of causality or force to change and alter the direction, simply allowing the person to do as they should with their will. And as we see in note, the question then gets raised, can we conclude the lifeguard escapes culpability? If we say that the lifeguard does not, then this basically proposes the problem then for the God of the free will theistic perspective at that point. Because at that point, there is the chance to utilize a way to redeem and save the individual, much in the same way a lifeguard would save the individual. Now, he anticipates, of course, when someone says, well, that's not a perfect analogy, and that's not something that you can compare easily, because that is a mortal man who does not know everything and thus is not the creator of all things, and that's the point that is mentioned, because as he mentions regarding the matter, says, yet the illustration does not do full justice to the actual situation, for unlike the boy who exists in relative independence of the lifeguard, in actuality, God made the boy and the ocean too. God made the ocean, which contains all things of it, because the Bible does say, God is the creator of all things. God predestines all things. God creates all things, including those components that make it up, such as the issue of not just simply the ocean, but the waves, the tides, and even the situations of creatures within the oceans that may cause certain things, such as sharks or any other kind of thing that may end up dragging someone into the waters in a much more further, deeper state. The lifeguard cannot even do such thing. Only God can, and thus where the issue points out that he said that the guard who is not a creator at all is responsible for permitting the boy to drown, even if the boy is supposed to have entered the service of his own free will. Does not God who made them appear in the worst light? Because God created all things, including that which causes the person to drown at that point. So, just some things to consider in light of this, because, again, we know the Bible does say God creates all things. No person on the other side denies this. The Calvinists don't deny this, and neither do the non-Calvinists deny that God creates all things. However, in light of that, does somehow the free will theist, the Arminian, the open theist, the provisionist, any of these other sort of different views, do they escape the problem in light of this particular analogy in the comparison with God at that point? I don't know. Let me know what y'all think in the comments regarding that matter. Get a discussion going. Personally, I think that this is definitely a more interesting analogy. When I read this, it was like, that's definitely going to be an interesting take for some of these people. And I just want to get this out there because, again, while I disagree with Gordon Clark, he definitely puts forth interesting perspectives that I don't think a lot of people give a lot of credit to, and not a lot of people hear about Clark these days. So, while I am certainly still a Van Tillian and specifically the Framian portion of Van Til, I would still say there's a lot of strengths and good arguments to see in light of Gordon Clark. Next time I will cover over his objection to his answer to the objection about if the Reformed view turns people into puppets or robots or not. But anyways, that being said, this has been RC Apologist. Y'all take care.